where was I? So, you want to think about hair like it's a ribbon. So you want to think about it as a group of hair rather than a whole bunch of individual strands of hair. And so this is my sketch of a ribbon, and I've colored outside the lines, but at first you just want to think about shading, and I actually like to shade not with the grain of the hair, but against the grain of the hair, and try and think about the overall, form side to side at first, instead of getting caught up in the details of all the individual strands, which can make things look kind of like spaghetti. So I'm gonna go in now with some highlights because the areas that are going to have the most texture are in that highlight area. So this time I am going with the direction of the hair, and you could actually do a layer first where you're going kind of against the grain, but just with this technique using the white for highlights, I really kind of like to just do it this way. And this isn't always the last kind of layer of detail that I'm going to do. In fact, the way that I'm shading this is maybe a little bit generalized compared to what I would do on the last layer. Because first I just want to get the sense of overall form. Now usually after this, and if you're following along with charcoal, this is a hard charcoal pencil that I'm about to use, and when I started off I used a medium charcoal pencil. So what I'm going to do now is kind of work a little bit into that highlight area. So for the most part, I think something like that's pretty good. And although I'm using marks here that go in the direction of the hair fibers, I'm not trying to get texture there. So I'm trying to make things darker here, but not really make them textured. Then you can have, a few maybe individual hairs kind of go off into the shadow area. Maybe they just kind of stick up a little bit more than others or something like that. And then of course some little flyaway hairs. And I'm using the fluffy brush where the shadows are, especially because those shadows should be less detailed and softer than everything else. If you hit the whole thing with a fluffy brush, just gives you an opportunity to kind of come back in. All right, so now I'm gonna do basically the same thing, but with a curl. So here's my medium pencil again, and if you think about a curl, so maybe something like this is going on. So there's my little basis for the curl, still thinking about things pretty much like a ribbon, but a little bit more complicated. So let's have our light source. Let's have it just still basically come from the same direction, that it's going to be from above, kind of a 45-degree angle, and it's going to be a little bit in front. So I'm going to have this section and the top be light, and this will have a little bit of shading. This will be pretty dark in here, pretty dark in there, and then start to get some light down here. So let me know if this is making sense. I think sometimes my doodles get a little bit crazy. And again, I'm just gonna kind of shade like side to side, really basic. This is gonna look maybe a little bit more geometric to begin with, and that's okay. So now there's a kind of basic form to everything. You have an idea that this is facing forward, that's curling backwards, all that good stuff. So now we can start to add a little bit more interesting stuff going on. I'm gonna start off once again with the white and get some highlights in here, and the lights are going to be here around the top because that's facing up, and around this side. But maybe I kind of want the hair not only to be flat, but maybe to kind of curl and rotate at the same time, or like twist, I guess is what I mean. So I'm gonna have some of these hairs from the top, instead of just perfectly going along the top and have everything go this way, I'm gonna have it kind of rotate that way a bit. Now, of course, it's really helpful when you're looking at some kind of a reference to do this stuff, so that way you can have an idea where the hairs go. But I really do encourage you also just to kind of play with things from your imagination a little bit, especially once you can start to imagine things, you know, as basic geometric forms like this, kind of three-dimensionally. And even if it doesn't work out, you know, you're spending some time like visually problem solving. But just throwing in kind of some wispy hairs that go in a different direction can be helpful here. Now, especially with curly hair, I feel like in some ways you have to edit it down as well. So maybe you would have a whole entire curl in there that you get all the details in, and then whatever's behind it, you might not really show all the details of that. But maybe keep that more quiet and kind of simple. At least that's how I've handled really curly hair, so that I don't drive myself insane. Just kind of choose some to be the star of the show, and then other than that, in the background, keep it kind of dark. Maybe throw in like a hint that something is happening in there somewhere. Basically, you would do the same thing here, but all kind of in a circle. So if I just do a really quick sketch about how a bun would work, think about a bun being kind of like this, and just depending on the bun, I mean, there are different ways to make them, right? But if you've got one of those that all the hair goes out in sections kind of like this, like a beach ball, right? Then you would start with that. If I go with the same light source coming from up here, then that means kind of a stripe like this is going to be getting light. And then all of this is really going to be in shadow. So it's kind of like shading a ribbon and a sphere at the same time. So I'm thinking about how a sphere would have a form shadow on this side, but also just each individual ribbon, kind of like that the bottom is more in shadow. There's going to be a highlight through here. I'm just going to give a little bit of shading anyway. And then just as the hair kind of dives that way into the bun, that it's going to get a little bit more shadow there too. And maybe just over here, a little bit of light, because the hair over on this side is going kind of that way. So then from here, it's just kind of the same process of starting highlights, thinking about the direction of the hairs going around the bun. All right, so I'm gonna do kind of a section over here, and then maybe I'll chat a little bit about eyebrows too. They're quite different because they don't really have so much depth. So her hair definitely comes up further than this. That's about all I'm gonna do here. So in this section in here, that's this section. And this area, there's like area that you can see the skin through, but it's all being shaded. So it's all a little bit in shadow. All right, so I'm gonna start over here, and what I'm seeing is that there are, on this side, there are a bunch of lights, and then there are some shadows kind of in here. So everything over here is not getting as much light as everything over here, and I'm seeing the most form kind of in like the middle section, and then more frizz toward the outside. So I'm gonna start in here where I see some of those definitions, and I am first just gonna shade a little bit in between the hair. So this is kind of negative shape stuff. And now I'm gonna be fairly minimal with the highlights, and the light is coming more from that direction. So I'm gonna make sure and not make the highlights right in the middle, but kind of off to the side a little bit. And since there is a lot going on here, I'm not really gonna do a base layer of highlights and then go over the top again, but I'm gonna try and get a little bit of variety as to what direction everything is facing. So I'm trying to get smaller highlights and then longer ones so that I have a little bit of kind of natural variety. So this is the same way that I would approach a beard for the most part. And out here where things seem pretty chaotic, like her hair is like, you know, like this. I think it's kind of fun just to make these sorts of marks. I did this in a painting recently. It was really nice, and they're not exactly the marks that, you know, they're not exactly the same shapes that I actually see in her hair, but they're kind of like my shorthand version of it. So I'll do something like that, and then every now and then, I'm gonna switch to a sharper pencil. Every now and then put in a more defined curl that's, you know, got a little bit more form to it. I feel like it can take a little while to learn how to make marks that are not overly repetitive. So there's something about us humans, we want to organize things, we want to straighten everything up, we want to make all our marks the same length, the same type of curve. And really when you're doing these highlights and stuff, you have to start to get away from that and do something more random. And when you're doing something more random, you're kind of doing things a little bit less precise as well. And that can mean that maybe you see a really neat mark or a really neat curl, but you go to draw and you're trying to make these random marks so they don't come out looking exactly the same. And it can be difficult to let go of that and just make marks that give you the gist of what's happening with the hair or whatever it is you're drawing, and to balance that with keeping things random. And so this is sort of the opposite. Over here, I made a dark mass in the background, and then, you know, I got some negative spaces, but I'm really focusing on the highlights. But here, I'm going to make some of the shapes of the little ringlets, and they're dark. So I'm doing more definition with the black charcoal than with the white in this situation. And here I am really trying to pay attention to the character. I'm looking at like this curl right here, and I'm trying to pay attention to the character of it. So even if I'm not replicating it exactly, I'm noticing that it's wider up here on that top part of the curl, and then more narrow at the bottom. And actually it splits into two. There's like a thin little piece over here that kind of separates and then joins back up with the rest of it at the bottom. So let's see how to recap. I guess the recap is to just always start really simple, ignore individual hairs to begin with. So whether you're using, or whether you have straight hair or curly hair or braids or whatever, start with some shadows and then just for the most part build the texture up in the light areas. And Lee, your question, if I use erasers to lift highlights, I more do that when I'm not using the white. So if I have white paper, I'll do that more. It is really helpful even when you're using the white to kind of like just use, especially if you have, it used to be called a Tough Stuff eraser, and then Generals bought them. So Generals has a stick eraser, or Mono's another brand. They have a stick eraser, and it's like the sweet spot is around like 2 millimeters or 4 millimeters, but 6 millimeters is too big. Don't get a 6 millimeter stick eraser. But yeah, those can be really nice. And sometimes I do that, but mostly I'm lazy because when I erase, there are little bits left behind and I have to get rid of them. So I tend to stick with just the white because I can keep that sharp and I don't have to smear anything afterwards. So thank you and you're welcome. Again, if you didn't get that hand PDF from a couple weeks ago, I'm done with the PDF. I have it. I sent it to everybody on my email list, and so if you didn't get a copy and you want a copy, contact me, let me know, and I will get that to you. And what are we doing next week? Smiles. We're doing smiles. So they always say you shouldn't put smiles in artwork because it's really difficult and it's really easy to make people look like monsters. So I'm going to go over how to draw a smile. And so of course this is going to include a little bit just about the mouth in general as well. But I'm gonna talk about how to do a smile and not make somebody look like a monster. So come back for that, and then the week after that we're gonna draw dogs, which is gonna be super fun, of course. Thanks again, everybody. I hope that you're doing well. I hope everybody is staying safe and healthy, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.